I swear to you, the very first second my boots touched the gravel at the Bunny Flat trailhead on Mount Shasta on September 14th, 2016, I felt a weight in the air so unnatural that my breath caught in my throat. And even though I had hiked in mountains across Colorado, Oregon, and Washington, I had never before experienced silence that heavy. Silence that seemed to press against the eardrums as though the mountain itself was listening. And it was in that instant that I realized all the stories I had dismissed as folklore might carry a truth that I was about to stumble into whether I wanted to or not. Because Shasta is not like other mountains, it is not just a peak rising 14,179 feet above Northern California. It is a monument to centuries of strange disappearances, whispered legends, and uneasy respect from the people who live in its shadow. I had told myself I was here to clear my mind, to take a week off from work and routine, to enjoy solitude before my friend Michael Lane would meet me on the weekend. But that justification now feels like a thin cover for something else, a deeper pull I could not articulate, because when I planned the trip, I had felt almost summoned, as though something in me already knew I would not return unchanged. The night before, in a diner in Redding, I overheard two older men at the counter arguing in hushed tones about a missing hiker from 1977 named John Squires, a boy who vanished near Panther Meadow, last seen collecting rocks before his parents turned their backs for only a minute, and one of the men muttered, "The mountain takes who it wants," while staring at the floor as if afraid to look anyone in the eye. And even though I tried to dismiss it as superstition, those words repeated in my head as I adjusted the straps of my backpack and stepped forward onto the trail. The air was crisp, scented with pine resin and volcanic soil, but beneath that freshness was another note I couldn't place, metallic and sharp like ozone before a thunderstorm. And though the sky was a perfect dome of September blue, without a single cloud, the atmosphere felt unstable, charged. As I ascended the first miles, the forest enveloped me in a cathedral of towering evergreens, their trunks blackened in places by old lightning strikes, and I couldn't shake the sensation that the branches leaned in just slightly too far, not in the way trees bend toward sunlight, but in the way curious beings bend toward a secret. And the further I walked, the less sound I heard, until even my own footsteps seemed muffled, as if the ground absorbed them. Around midday, I stopped at a clearing where volcanic boulders jutted like broken teeth, and I remembered something I had read in an archived newspaper clipping from 1934 about a woman named Eleanor Marsh, a schoolteacher who had spent her summer sketching plants in these very woods before she vanished without explanation. Her diary, recovered later, described echoes that reply though no one is near, and shadows that do not belong, phrases I had laughed at while scrolling the scanned pages on my laptop weeks earlier, but which now lingered in my mind with a sting of unease. By the time the sun dipped westward, staining the snowcap in burning gold, I had found a small plateau near a twisted cluster of pines that looked half dead, though they still clung stubbornly to life. And I set my tent there, grateful for flat ground yet unsettled by the way the trees seemed to spiral unnaturally. I boiled water for instant coffee, watching the steam rise, and that was when it happened. The steam did not drift with the breeze but curled sharply upward against it, like something unseen was pulling it. And a split second later, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of fingers dragging across stone, faint, deliberate, not the scatter of falling rock or the rustle of an animal, but the tactile scrape of flesh on rough surface. I froze, my pulse hammering so hard it blurred my vision, and turned my head toward the sound. But the moment I moved, it stopped, leaving behind a silence so intense it pressed on me physically. I tried to rationalize. Maybe a branch shifted. Maybe my mind played tricks after a long day. But in my gut, I knew this was no accident. It was an introduction, a first note in a sequence the mountain had been playing for centuries, and now it had chosen me to hear. That second day on the mountain, I moved like someone half awake, pulled by a current I couldn't see, because although my body was exhausted from not sleeping the night before, some deeper part of me refused to rest, as though the mountain had already wound its fingers through my mind and was tugging me along invisible threads. And by the time the morning sun hit the treetops, I was already walking, hardly remembering packing my tent, only aware of a gnawing compulsion to keep going higher. The trail narrowed into switchbacks between volcanic outcroppings, the kind of black rock that still carried the memory of fire, jagged and sharp against the pale sky. And I noticed how the air thinned in a way that didn't make sense. Not just the altitude, but something else, a thinning of reality itself, like a veil stretched too far. Around noon, I remembered the words of a man I had met in a diner in Dunsmuir 2 days earlier, a stranger named Carl Donovan who leaned across his coffee cup and told me if I wanted to hear the mountain breathe, I should make my way to a place locals called Castle Crags, though it was not on any official map I had seen, and though his delivery was casual. The way his pale gray eyes locked on mine gave me a chill that returned now, as I saw a faint trace of path curling toward jagged spires of stone in the distance. I followed instinct more than trail, pushing through groves where the trees seemed warped, their branches twisting back on themselves, and I kept feeling the sensation that the air pressed against me like water, resistance in every step, and yet I couldn't stop, as if stopping would mean losing something vital I hadn't yet understood. When I reached a clearing, the sight before me made my stomach lurch. A perfect circle of stones laid out with unnatural precision, each one flat, of equal size, none resembling the surrounding geology, and at the center lay a shallow depression filled with water so still it might have been glass. But the reflection it gave me was not right. Above my head the September sky was bright and blue, yet in the pool it was dusk, an almost violet twilight with no sun. And when I leaned closer, I didn't see my own face, but that of another man. Pale skin stretched thin over hollow cheeks, eyes far too wide and dark, lips parting as if to speak though no sound emerged. I stumbled back with such force I nearly fell, and in that instant the reflection snapped back to normal water, rippling in sunlight, as if mocking me for believing otherwise. My chest heaved, and my first instinct was to flee. But instead my eyes caught on something else, symbols carved into a nearby boulder, rough yet deliberate, concentric circles crossed with straight lines, patterns that set off a shiver of recognition. Weeks earlier, when researching the mountain, I had found digitized pages of Eleanor Marsh's recovered diary from 1934, the vanished schoolteacher, and one sketch in particular came back to me now with dreadful clarity. The same circles and intersecting lines, drawn shakily with notes beneath that read, "The doorway sings, but not for all." I stood transfixed, feeling a pressure in my skull as though unseen hands pressed inward, and though my rational mind screamed to turn around, to descend, another voice deeper inside whispered insistently that I had been brought here for a reason, that to leave would mean never knowing, and the thought of ignorance suddenly terrified me more than the face in the water. I forced myself to keep walking, leaving the circle behind, but carrying its image carved into memory, following a faint alignment of stones that felt less like a trail and more like a pattern laid out by intention. The deeper I went into the grove, the more wrong everything became. The ground soft and spongy, as though rotting from beneath though no water flowed nearby. The air colder with every step despite the sun shining bright, and the trees themselves bent away from the path as if recoiling. Soon the mist began to rise, thin white tendrils seeping from the ground rather than falling from the sky, coiling between my legs and crawling up my arms until I shivered with a dread that no logic could explain. My watch said only 4:15 in the afternoon, but the light had dimmed as though dusk came hours early, and when I tried to orient myself the forest spun, landmarks shifting, trees rearranging, and for a few terrifying moments I couldn't tell which direction I had come from. I thought of the stories of experienced hikers losing themselves just a few miles from the trailhead, disappearing as if swallowed, and for the first time I understood how it could happen. Yet the strangest part was that I wasn't afraid of being lost. I was afraid of being found, because with every step deeper I felt less alone, a presence building around me, not following exactly but surrounding, a low vibration in the bones of the earth itself. It was at that moment I realized I had crossed a threshold, invisible but undeniable, and though no sign marked it, I knew I had entered the true heart of the mountain's secret, a place not shown on maps, a place where stories like Eleanor's and John Squire's were born, a place I should never have reached yet could no longer escape. The third night on the mountain is etched into me with a sharpness that no passage of time has dulled, and even as I speak, the memory rises with such immediacy that my chest tightens and my palms grow damp, because when I pitched my tent near the stone circle, I thought only to study it under moonlight, to see if my rational mind might reclaim control by framing it as geology or coincidence. But instead I crossed into something far stranger than I had ever imagined. Darkness fell with an unnatural speed, the forest silencing itself as if every living thing had withdrawn, and the air grew heavy with a vibration too low to be sound, a pulsing in the ground that resonated in my teeth and bones until I felt hollowed out from within. Around midnight, the stones began to glow with a faint bluish light. So subtle at first, I thought it was reflection, but as it grew, I saw the light came from within the rock itself, like embers cooling in reverse. And then came the voice, not external, not audible, but inside me, a layered chorus that was neither male nor female, human nor inhuman, speaking not in words but in impressions, waves of meaning that pressed into my mind until I gasped as though drowning. The message was both simple and unbearable. You do not belong, and yet you were called. I wanted to run, but when I tried to move my legs, they would not obey, my body frozen as if pinned by invisible hands. And in the stillness, the pool at the circle's center shimmered, its surface rippling though no wind stirred. And again the reflection shifted. This time it was not a face but a scene. Rows of figures cloaked in white standing upon the mountain centuries earlier, chanting in silence, their lips moving without sound, their eyes fixed on the sky where light streamed down in columns like glass. I felt their gaze pierce me across time, and though I blinked and shook my head, the vision did not vanish, instead deepening until I saw one figure break from the group and step forward, pulling back its hood to reveal the same gaunt, hollow face I had seen before, the one in the water, and it raised a hand in greeting or warning. I could not tell which, and in that moment the pressure in my skull grew unbearable. A high-pitched ringing erupted, not in my ears but inside my bones, and the ground trembled as if the mountain itself exhaled, and then I was thrown backward, my tent collapsing, the world spinning in a chaos of light and sound. I remember crawling, hands clawing at earth that felt soft and pulsing like flesh, and above me the stars blurred into streaks as though the sky itself bent and folded, and I thought I would lose my mind. Then suddenly, silence. The glow vanished, the ground stilled, the forest returned to blackness so complete I couldn't see my own hands, and for several minutes I crouched there shivering, convinced that if I made a sound something would notice. When I finally dared to move, I stumbled toward the trees, desperate for distance. But the forest had changed. Trunks leaned at impossible angles. Branches interlocked like cages, and every direction led me back toward the circle no matter how far I walked. Panic rose, but then through the dark came a figure holding a lantern, its glow warm and steady, and I nearly wept with relief thinking another hiker had found me. But as the figure drew closer, I saw its face, pale and hollow, the same eyes that had stared from the water, and my relief turned to terror, so sharp it froze me in place. The lantern flickered, and in its glow, I saw countless others behind him, silent figures half hidden by the mist, their forms wavering as though not entirely solid, watching me with an attention that felt like gravity. I do not remember collapsing, but I must have, because when I woke hours later the sun was rising, my tent intact, no footprints in the soil, no stones glowing, nothing to prove what I had seen except the deep raw ache in my chest and the echo of that voice repeating, "You were called." Morning arrived with a cruel normalcy, birds singing, leaves rustling, sunlight piercing through the canopy as though nothing had happened, and yet I felt hollow and fractured, every step down the mountain a struggle, because my legs no longer seemed my own, carrying not just exhaustion but a strange weight, an invisible tether to the circle, to the faces in the water, to whatever had reached into me the night before. And when I finally stumbled into the small parking lot at Bunny Flat and saw Michael waving, Relief and worry etched across his face. I could not speak, the words dead in my throat, absurd even to me, and instead nodded weakly, my body shaking. In the days that followed in Mount Shasta City, I tried to rationalize it away. Lack of sleep, overexertion, dehydration, but facts kept returning that defied explanation. The shallow scratches along my wrists, faint but present, that I could not remember. The notebook on which I had sketched the stone symbols while my hand shook uncontrollably, symbols I had never seen before in person, and the number 311 burned into my mind. The exact time I had first heard my name whispered in the night. A time that would return in dreams again and again. I revisited the historical archives in town, compelled to seek answers, and found Eleanor Marsh's diary entry dated October 2nd, 1934, describing with unsettling similarity the circle, the figures, and the feeling of being summoned. The circle showed me their faces, and now they wait until I return. Words so close to my own experience that my stomach dropped, and I understood in a new, terrifying way that this had been happening for generations, that the mountain had a memory and a will, and that it chose its witnesses and victims carefully, subtly, across time. I spoke to locals cautiously, mentioning only fragments, and they either smiled with a knowing glance or grew silent. Especially the older residents who remembered stories their parents had whispered to keep them from wandering too far, nodding as though they understood, as though the mountain itself communicated through them. And I began to realize that those tales were not mere warnings, but records of encounters, preserved orally because the mountain would not let them rest in paper or photographs. Even now, years later, every September, always between the 14th and the 27th, I dream the same dream. I am standing before the stone circle, the pool reflecting not my own face, but that pale, hollow-eyed man who opens his mouth in silent speech. And each year the dream feels less like a dream and more like a countdown, a summons, a reminder, and I awaken with the same raw terror, knowing the mountain has not released me, that I am still bound by invisible threads, that someday I may have to return, not out of choice, but because the mountain wants me back, and I know now that the disappearances, the whispers, the odd lights, and the silence are all part of a covenant older than anyone alive. A covenant I walked into willingly or not. And though I live my life in cities far away, the tether tugs, the memory whispers, and I understand at last why people never truly laugh when speaking of Mount Shasta. Why the legends persist, why the mountain watches. Because it never forgets, and it never forgives, and those who have been called may never escape. Not fully, not ever.